Yeah, so, right, who we got today then, Gary? We've got George, yes?
Yes, the boy.
Now, are you gonna bring up, there's a lovely story of when you were was it the True album? When you were finishing at Compass Point that, Boy George was literally
Ah,
waiting at the door to come in?
no, it's more low rent than that, actually. It was Red Bus Studios, which is
You
where
changed
where
it in
was
your book. You changed it, you made it
where
Compass Point.
no, I don't think I did. I think you must
Yeah,
have
you did.
misread. Where's Red Bus Studios? Where was that?
That was by Church Street Market
That's
in,
right.
off Edgware Road. Listen
Yeah.
Grove way, yeah.
Yeah, right. So, we weren't sunbathing anywhere. So we were mixing gold, and we've been mixing it all night. And it got to that stage where we were mixing it for so long, people suddenly started saying, "I can't hear the bass drum anymore," as they do. And outside the door was Steve Levine and Boy George waiting to come in to finish off one of their mixes. And that's the kind of life we led in the 80s, when hits were being made.
Yes.
So it was just a factory. It
No,
was a
but
bit.
it's more what he said, wasn't it? Wasn't he? Would you get a move on so some real talent can come in?
Luckily, he doesn't remember saying that. Probably by now. The
No, he
first time
probably doesn't. Although I will bring it up. No, I won't know.
yeah, and the first time I remember going to George's squat at Warren Street, and we all went in. Spandau Ballet went in for this photo session. It was our first photo shoot with Graham Smith taking the pictures, who lived there as well at Warren Street squat, and. And as we were coming through the door, George leant over the banister and said, "I can sing better than your fucking singer any day." And in the end, he was probably right. Who knows? Welcome to the Rockonteurs.
Okay, guys, I'm ready.
Well, it's a big tune for sure. I actually wrote that originally for Tina Turner.
Of course, I had gone and found Joni Mitchell down in Florida and brought her back.
What people forget about Bowie is that he was such a kind man.
Remember me? I'm in a band now. It's called Roxy Music.
You know this thing about the 10,000 hours of experience?
Oh, yeah,
and you get good at something. When we recorded Arnold Lane, we'd done about 50 hours.
The Rockonteurs podcast with Gary Kemp and Guy Pratt.
So where are you, George?
I am in Camden.
Gateway to the north.
Yes, I'm in. I'm actually at the moment. I'm in because I've been out of my house for the last 2 years, so I'm in a rented place, sort of Mornington Crescent, top of Camden, and waiting to go back to my house. Hopefully, maybe in March if I'm lucky.
Well, you're doing it up.
Oh my God! Well, the thing is, I started doing it up before all this happened, and then I had probably planning permission, and then I had to go back and sort of apply, and then the pandemic hit. So yeah, I've been out of there for about 2 years. It's been insane.
So memories of the Camden Palace right in front of you. I mean, you're just around the corner, are you?
I'm not far from there. Yeah, that's close. But I mean, I've lived in Hampstead 30 years, so I'm from this sort of neck of the woods. I've been living here for a long time.
Didn't you? Yeah, at one point, I think it was back in the 80s. You used to live next door to Nick Mason from Pink Floyd, didn't you?
He lives across the road. I don't know if he's still there, but he lives across the road, on the corner. So yeah, he's just across from me. I tried to get him to invite me for a cup of tea, but he didn't seem keen on the idea.
Well, I remember years ago, because I've worked with Nick for over 30 years, and he told me that he used to have fans of yours camp outside his house.
Yeah.
And he'd come out in the morning and they'd say to him, "What's it like living next door to a pop star?"
George, looking at your Wikipedia, honestly, it's like trying to catch up on Coronation Street's last 60 years in one go. I mean, there's so much that's gone on in your life.
I tend not to read my Wikipedia. I did try to change it once because I thought some of the facts were incorrect and unhelpful. But when I went back the next day, it had just gone back to where it was. So I thought I'd just give up on it,
Well, we'll ignore it. We'll talk about when we first met, though. I mean,
I'm basically going to let you two bitch it out for the next time.
Yeah. I mean, I used to be, because we go back to like Steve Strange in a way was our introduction, because we ended up in the same room together at Billy's down in Soho, and then later on at the Blitz, and all very famous now, of course. But at the time, we were just a bunch of kids. I remember being quite terrified of you then, George.
I actually think, let me tell you, when I first met you guys was actually in the squat in Kim Bowen's, I think it might have been Kim Bowen's bedroom.
Warren
You were
Street.
doing a shoot there. No, yeah, you were doing a shoot there. Something was going on, and you guys were there.
That's right.
And it was sort of just, it was, you know, you remember that period, everything sort of happened quite quickly. There was a lot going on, you know.
Yeah.
And I certainly remember Martin. I think you were there as well.
We were, yeah.
Yeah, and you were in the house. And I remember sort of, you know, because it was around the time I was sort of, you know, contemplating, you know, future stardom for myself as well. So I remember seeing you lot all dressed up and thinking, who are these lot? Who do they think they are?
No, but I remember clearly as we walked in the door, you leant over the banister and shouted, "I can sing better than your fucking singer any day." And I remember us all raising our eyes going, "Yeah, right." You know, not realizing that you were going to, you know, take over the world at some point with your voice.
Mind you, Tony's got a beautiful voice as well. So, you know, it was just one of those things. I'll tell you a funnier story. I remember going to see Sade perform outside the Beetroot on a lorry. Do you remember that?
Yeah. Oh God. Yeah. When it was Pride, they were called Pride.
Pride, yeah. I remember seeing them at the Marquee.
And I did a similar thing with her. I said, "Oh, she'll get nowhere." I was so wrong.
But you didn't come on that New York trip with us when Sade came as a model before she could sing. We went to New York to play at the Underground Club. You didn't.
No, I didn't come on it, but I remember seeing the footage. At that point, I'd never left the UK. I'd never even been to Europe. I'd never left England. So I remember seeing all this footage of you guys in New York. And in fact, it was your manager, Steve, that came up to me in the street in somewhere in Goode Street. I saw him in the street and he said, "Oh, your record's getting played on the radio in America." I had no idea. And it was Steve that told me. And I was like, "Oh my God, I couldn't sort of even imagine it." You know, it was like, how did they know about me? You know, it was...
Well, I mean, it was quite extraordinary, wasn't it? When you think that, I mean, we can talk about it in a bit, but I mean, just that you could break America in such a huge way as a man dressed in the way you were dressed. America, of all places, that is so straight.
I think that it's that sort of when you're an import, people are less offended by you. If you're homegrown, it's more of a concern. You know, like always one of us. But when you're a sort of an alien commodity and you're brought in from overseas, people are like, "Oh yeah, well that's what they like in England." They're all like that.
Well, except that what's extraordinary is like there was Bowie before you, and then there was you, George, and now there's the same bullshit happening about Harry Styles. It's, you know, in America, oh, he's not manly. It's like it never goes away in America.
It's funny, you know, but I suppose, you know, especially now, I think the news has become a sort of branch of show business now. You know, it was, remember when we were kids, it was sort of people in corduroy just telling you the facts. And now these people are like, they're all stars in their own right. You know, they've all got beautiful teeth and they've all got brands to promote. And I think news is sort of insatiable now in a way that it wasn't really like that even in the 80s, even though, you know, the press was so powerful in the 80s. But now it just seems relentless. You know, they're just looking for things to write about. And, you know, it's, you know, I guess for us, because we've sort of seen it all before, I mean, that's not a reason not to do something. I think in respect to Harry, I think it's great. You know, he's living his best life right now. He's in his moment, and I think you should enjoy it.
I get what Guy's saying as well, that you know, what you were doing at that time, and Bowie to a certain extent before, although Bowie didn't break America truly until he went straight.
That wasn't what, yeah, exactly. That was before he wasn't successful when he had
bisexual. That didn't really work in America. But you know what you did, you know, breaking those grounds so much, you know, getting young kids to feel empowered by the way they truly were, which you must have done 40 years ago. You know, you'd think the world would have moved on a bit more, a bit faster than it really has. I mean, but then again, what did change the future, didn't it, at that time, I think?
I think it was a sort of unconscious thing. You know, I think that we were, you know, teenagers, you know, we were, you know, when you're young, you just think you've got this sort of undeniable right to do whatever you choose. And the idea that someone else is going to tell you what to wear is just so ridiculous. You know, even though what we were wearing at the time, or before we got famous, would have got us chased down the street, you know, and beat up by some people. I think it was youthful belligerence. And I think it's easier for me now to look back and say, oh God, I didn't really realize what impact, you know, I knew I was attention seeking. I was in a band, I was, you know, traveling the world, and, you know, it was all very exciting, but I wasn't as conscious of the responsibility. I didn't really think about it. I was just, I guess in a way, just full of my own self-importance.
George, if I get to
Yes.
a musical point, the thing is having, because I read your book, your first book, when it came out, and absolutely loved it.
Yeah, brilliant.
Where your whole delivery style, as you're showing us now, is just so gorgeous. But what I find interesting musically is if someone read the story of your upbringing and where you went, and then the world of squats and punk and the clubs and everything and how you dressed, and if someone read that story and then saw pictures of you, you would assume, right, that the music you made would be kind of edgy, like an Ian Curtis or a John Lydon, and yet you have this wonderful, really, really gentle sort of pop melodic sensibility. I've always thought it's quite interesting that where that came from.
Well, I think bands, before I started Culture Club, I just wanted to be like the Banshees. So I was a goth and I'm still a goth. But when you start a band, you have to take on everybody else's kind of ideas and influences. And Culture Club sort of became very different to what I planned it to be. Do you know what I mean? I don't know if that happened with Spandau Ballet, but certainly...
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying.
You have to listen to people and you have to you have to try and be a democracy. And it does change what you do musically. And I suppose in a funny sort of way, it was kind of accidentally subversive. It was like you had this sort of contradiction of the sort of look, and then you had the sort of sound of the band. But we were big soul fans. So we grew up, obviously we were Bowie kids, but we also grew up listening to Gladys Knight and the Pips and Stylistics and all of that kind of American soul. And I think when you love music, there's one thing to love music, and then, of course, what you love in terms of your identity can be completely different. And I think that is one of the most beautiful contradictions about that period in history was, that you guys as well, you looked a certain way, but you made beautiful soul music for quite a similar, concept, really. But I think we were a product of what we grew up loving, and also we were sort of attention seekers, and we love the idea of, sort of people taking our picture and, just causing general, controversy. I mean, that was just, I guess I still like doing that now, really.
I completely concur with what you're saying. I mean, it's just certain types of music in their time were subversive. To go for bands like ourselves coming out of that whole blitz electronic scene to suddenly go and do Blue-Eyed Soul, and to do it as, dare I say, as kind of as perfect, if you like, as possible, was shocking in those days. It would alienate the NME for a start, and that used to turn us on, didn't it, to do something like that? But also because we wanted to be successful in the charts as well. I think we love the ideas of making hit records. That's what we grew up buying.
Exactly, and I think that in a way, a lot of it was learning on the spot. I mean, I had no musical education. I didn't, go to music classes at school. As soon as I found out they wouldn't let me play Get It On by T-Rex and they wanted me to play Greensleeves, I was out of there. I was like, no, this isn't for me. So I kind of didn't do any of that stuff. And I think our generation, we were very, we just did it. We didn't read the manual. We just went out there and did what we did. And we sort of just believed that we could do it. And we sort of threw a lot of things into the pot that maybe didn't necessarily go with each other. We were just talking about my look and, the whole reggae thing that we embraced. I used to get chased down the street, by like Rastas because they were like so outraged that I was, wearing makeup and I had dreadlocks and a big Rasta hat on. And I used to get sort of so much abuse, but it was kind of invigorating in a way, to sort of get that kind of reaction. It felt like you were doing something right. People rejected.
When you were in America, though, did you ever get any threats? Were people genuinely hateful towards you at times?
People were generally gorgeous, but there were a few times when, in the beginning, down south wasn't a place that we didn't get many gigs. We didn't get many gigs down south. And in fact, there was one night on Halloween when I had to go on stage wearing a bulletproof vest, and I wasn't happy about that because it made me look really fat, so I was really miserable about doing that. Like a big sort of,
it's better than looking dead, love.
So, there were a few times I used to get a lot of those sort of religious groups coming to the gigs with, signs saying, if sex is a sin, what is Boy George, and all of that stuff. And then they moved on to Marilyn Manson. But for years, we used to get those people. And I used to sort of open the top of the limousine and kind of get out and wave at them and blow them a kiss.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is, George, you were quite straight looking compared to some people at the Blitz Club. I mean, Marilyn, for example, was completely full Marilyn Monroe, wasn't he?
Well, I think he was looking for, he was kind of trying to make men fall in love with him. That was Marilyn's kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? That was Marilyn's agenda. He was like, oh, I just want everyone to fancy me and then I can reject them all. So that was his plot. It's like he just wanted to attract people, and then the minute they were interested, no, I'm sorry, I'm not interested.
I'm always kind of saddened by the fact that Steve Strange, who really was the gatekeeper, if you like, and the one who came up with this. Did he come up with any concept? It was just a Bowie night, wasn't it? Really, in Tuesday nights at the Billy's and Blitz, and then it just ended up becoming something greater, something that determined the whole look of the next decade as far as youth culture and pop culture is concerned. And I always feel quite sad that Steve Strange never made the same sort of brilliant journey that some of us made.
Yeah, I think Steve, I got very close to Steve sort of in the later years, not so much back in the day because we were in fierce competition with each other, but, as we got older, I got very close to Steve and I was very, very fond of him, and I actually did a great photo shoot with him a few years back, and I just really got to like him as a person. Once we got through all the sort of petty, sort of squabbles, I actually really, really did like Steve, and I was very sad when he passed away. And, I think that he was very important, and I think that song, Fade to Grey, even though at the time I would have never have said this, I remember going to a New Romantic club in Woolwich where I came from, and they were playing Fade to Grey, and I was devastated. I was like, even in Woolwich, my God, I can't escape this man. But now I can look back and say that record, when you listen to Fade to Grey, it's
aged really well. It's aged really
such a
well.
good record.
Yeah,
It's just so good, and I couldn't have said it at the time, so it's nice to be able to say it now, really.
And then, sadly, you and I helped to carry his coffin 5 years ago, which was a shocking.
Yeah, I mean, but, at the same time, it was a really nice, I was glad that I could do that, and I was glad that I could be part of that moment, even though it was an awful moment. It was great there was a nice kind of camaraderie about that, which for me finished the circle a little bit,
Yeah. Guy, for me and George, I know it's good, and we'll talk to George about it, but I know that our sort of moment of revelation, Damascene moment was Bowie doing Ziggy Stardust on Top of the Pops. I mean, you're a couple of years. I think I dare say you're a couple of years younger than me.
I'm between you and George. Yeah, no, it was the same. It was absolutely the same. I mean, although I got into sort of older people's movies, but yes, because Bowie was my older sister's thing, and Starman was that absolute defining moment, wasn't it?
I had the same thing with my brother Richard, was the Bowie fan to start with, and then we're around about Man Who Sold the World. My brother Richard was really into Bowie, and then as Bowie got more flamboyant, he was passed on to me, and I remember hearing those records through my brother's bedroom door, pounding, out the speakers, and just being so transfixed with, that Man Who Sold the World album, and just wanting to know more about who Bowie was. And I think, what he did was so. At that time, for me, as a kid, I was living in Southeast London. I felt very alienated in my surroundings. And when he sort of landed, it was just like, oh my God, there is hope.
Well, there's a lovely thing I remember in your book. For some reason, George, there's this one moment of, I can't remember. It's when you're very young and you've left home and you're sitting in a club and feeling all alone. And for some reason, you just said, I just wish they'd play some Sex Pistols or David Bowie. And it's like, that's what would make everything all right.
I think that's still really the same now. I've just been, I'm making a record at the moment with Tony Visconti, so it's quite nice to be talking about that. And that was a total accident. I just a few months ago, I just suddenly thought, why have I never worked with him? He's one of my favorite producers, and obviously he's produced some of my favorite records. And I just ended up getting in touch with him, and I'm hoping to make my next album with Tony. So that's amazing. So again, it's that mad connection to Bowie and those records. I mean, I think when I was a teenager, music, I mean, still is hugely important to me, but then it was really everything. It was just all I thought about 24/7 was records and dressing up, of course.
But Bowie had given us all license. I remember feeling so different going to the school playground on the Friday after that Top of the Pops, after seeing Starman, and everybody talking about it. Suddenly Mark Bolan was yesterday's man, it felt like. And
not to me.
Well, listen, without a doubt, watching Mark do on Top of the Pops doing Telegram Sam was another great moment, or the glitter on his cheek that we first saw, that was incredible. And Electric Warrior as well. It's still, one of the great albums of all time.
Oh, I'd go even further. Slider. I love Slider. I love early T-Rex. I've got one tattoo of Ziggy on one arm and I've got one of Mark on the other. To me, they were the sort of pivotal people of that period. But I still love T-Rex. I still play it all the time. It still gives me that same giddy feeling when I hear it.
And did you meet David?
Met David, never met Mark, which was really sad, but I met David like 3 or 4 times. I had dinner with David in New York in about 2004, which was insane. And I was still, even though I was famous myself, I still felt like that little 16-year-old kid, that was like a massive fan. And he was so...
Did you wash his feet?
I did.
Did you offer to wash his feet?
I did wash his feet, but he was very, very sweet to me. Like, just adorable. And I remember we were talking about, like, British tea and what was on telly. We talked a little bit about EastEnders randomly and a little bit about sort of Russian art films, which I didn't know very much about, but I just pretended.
You must have met David, haven't you, Guy?
Yes. I famously had my picture taken with because I support the band I was in, Ice House, in the early 80s. We supported him on the Serious Moonlight tour. And I got
I'm so jealous that you had a photograph with him because I never, ever managed to. I met him a few times. I never got a photo, and every time I see anyone with Bowie, I get so bitter.
Oh, well, there's actually quite a good story on this one.
Yeah, I'm the same,
George, because he came to see us. We were doing this festival in Germany, and I was in catering, and he came. All these flashes were going off. I looked up and I said, "Fuck me, it's David Bowie," and he grabbed me and said, "I think you should be in this." And so I got, and it's me, and it's Tony Thompson, his drummer, and Carmine Rojas, his bass player, and they all put their arms around me, and I struck this sort of, "Who, me?" sort of expression, pointing at myself. So I got the picture, and then years later, I actually did his penultimate live performance was with David Gilmour, with us at the Royal Albert Hall. He did Arnold Lane and Comfortably Numb. And we did a sort of team photo in the afternoon. And I was writing my book at the time. I said, "David, I want to try and recreate this photo you and I had taken." He went, "All right." So Brian Rasick, photographer, was there. And I pulled the same pose. And he went, "I remember that picture." I went, "No, you don't." It went, "Yeah, Ice House, Germany, 1984.
Exactly. Well, it was always seemed to be like he was very aware of what was going on. Even when I spent that couple of hours with him in New York, he was very switched on. He knew what was going on. And it was always his thing, when he came to the Blitz you remember that time he came to the Blitz,
Oh, yeah. I was
swooped in and sort of...
How did you feel?
Well, I was very... very excited, but I was trying to hide it desperately because, it wasn't cool to act like a mad screaming fan. So I was trying...
Who was he with, or was he on his own?
I can't remember. I think he might have been with Coco. Actually.
Coco, right.
And, it was pandemonium. Suddenly all these cool people that were so cool just lost the plot.
I remember saying, "Don't talk to him. Don't go near him. He's yesterday's man." And then being really pissed off that people had decided to be in his video.
Well, I remember because I remember sort of being selected as one of the people to parade before him to possibly be in the video for Ashes to Ashes, and I never made the grade. I think in a funny sort of way though, because I was about to start my own band, I was quite happy that I wasn't in that video because I thought, well, I felt like I might have sort of slightly denigrated myself, and when you're that age, you think you're too cool for everyone, don't you? And that's kind of, in a funny sort of way, that's part of what makes you good, is that you've got to sort of have this mad self-belief. But, I'm still a mad Bowie fan. I've always been a mad Bowie fan.
I don't want to credit myself in any way, was we sort of watching Spandau Ballet play at the Blitz, and then you came to the HMS Belfast gig, I know, because I've seen pictures.
I remember it very well. I remember it very well.
Was it an inspiration for you to say, right, well, I'm going to do it now as well? Or do you think you would have done it anyway?
No, I think that at that point, I'll be really honest, I literally had no idea what I was going to do. And, I don't know about you, but, you play guitar, so it's different. You have a sort of different, when you learn an instrument, I think it gives you a sort of confidence about being a musician. But I was sort of, very naive. And I just, I knew I loved music. I didn't know whether I could ever do it as a job, and certainly seeing you guys around that time and, Animal Nightlife. And, I remember going to see Rip Rig and Panic. I remember going to see, them with Nana, singing in a shop on Tottenham Court Road, all these mad things, going to see things like the Gang of Four and all those sorts of bands. And I think it was, I think that it was the punk thing that was like, if they can do it. I knew people that learned bass in 3 weeks and went and joined a band,
Shush. My brother learned bass overnight. So I don't want to denigrate the bass guitar guy, obviously, but
No, it's the easiest instrument to play. To a
maybe I should become a bass player. I think that it would be.
But no, the thing is, Joe, when did you discover? Because that's the thing. You clearly have a wonderful ear for a tune. You've got a great sort of McCartney-esque sense of melody. I mean, when did you realise you had that?
Well, I think that it's to start with. Obviously, when the band got together, we had John, who had been in punk bands, and he had a little bit of experience about songwriting. And I don't know if you knew, but the original name of our band was the Sex Gang Children. I remember.
Excellent. Yeah, no, I remember that. I remember hearing.
I remember John saying to me, "You know what? He went to California on a holiday, and he took a sort of early demo tape of Culture Club, and he said everyone in LA loved the band, but nobody thought Sex Gang Children was a particularly commercial name for a band, and so we decided to get rid of that. And I actually gave it to the band. I actually gave it to Andy Sex Gang. I said, "Oh, you can have the name," and we sort of settled on Culture Club. But in the early days, I really wanted to, the sort of early songs that we wrote were very, goth inspired. I was a big Bauhaus fan, Susie and the Banshees, and there was that really interesting period between sort of punk and what we did, that sort of late electro sound that was so exciting as well. And actually, I would say that, it's only as I've got older that I've sort of realized that I can write a tune, and I love doing it. I think for me, that's my favorite thing of everything I do, the process of writing a song and recording it. And the rest of it, I find very, more and more tedious every day.
That's shocking you say that, because that just it's something about your own self-belief, because, oh my God, your songs were incredible. I mean, beautiful melodies and really well sung. But it takes you years to realize that.
I would actually, I don't mean to, I think I'm getting better. I think I'm getting better. And I think that, as you get older and you start to realize why you're doing music, you're not controlled by chart positions or the pressure of a record company or someone telling you what to do. And you start to kind of develop a sort of freedom, which I have to say I really enjoy now. I don't know whether you get the same pleasure out of writing, but, I mean, we're artists. We're only really concerned with what we're doing now, and, when people say to me, oh, it sounds very now, I always think, well, it is now. Why wouldn't it?
Yeah.
And is John Themis still your partner?
No. John has given up music and he's got involved in some other world. And I've got new people now. But the great thing about what we do is that there's always really exciting people coming in and out of your world, And obviously, as I said, just now, I'm working with Tony Visconti, and I'm doing interesting collaborations. I feel like right now, I feel very free musically. I feel like, it's something I do because I love. It's not something I do because I'm under any pressure. I'm kind of feel like I can not do what I want, because obviously I've got a commercial ear. I can't help that. I grew up listening to beautifully crafted pop songs, and that's kind of what I try to write. But I'm always experimenting with the sounds that I make and who I work with. I love that, that freedom.
And what about the DJing? George? Was that a sort of to get away from the strain of creating, or was that just another thing that you love to do?
It was an escape at the time. It was an escape from sort of other people's ideas of what I was. When Acid House exploded in the UK, it was so exciting, and just going clubbing was so liberating. And I was able to go to raves, with thousands of people, and nobody bothered me.
Oh, do you know what? I've just had a really weird random memory. I was on tour with Pink Floyd, and we were away for a year. And the whole Acid House thing happened when we were away. And while we were in Australia, we all got into this surfwear company called 100% Mambo. And it became the thing. We came back to England, and I took the band to, I think it was Shoom or one of them. And suddenly all my mates were in Dungarees eating watermelon with, and I saw.
I love that description of Acid House.
and in this club, you walked past. I think you were with maybe Fat Tony and a couple of other faces, and you were all wearing head to toe Mambo.
Yeah.
Right, I remember because it was a cool Acid House label, and I remember going to Wembley Stadium the next day and saying to the band in the dressing room, "Guys, you're not going to be. I've just seen Boy George. You're fashion leaders again for the first time in 20 years."
I know I've always been a bit of a non-stop fashion obsessive, Mambo was very cool at that moment,
great,
wasn't it? And also. Acid House wasn't really about dressing up. It was sort of a reversal of all of that. It was all about dancing and sweating and whatever. And fashion was, there was some fashion, but it wasn't sort of pressurized fashion. It was basically dungarees and melon, which I love.
Exactly.
But I remember thinking how kind of sus you were, because Spandau had become this arena band, and we were making rockier and rockier records. And then suddenly we were yesterday's men because the whole Acid House DJ culture had happened, and there you were, you'd gone that way too, and I thought that was really clever, but also because it suited you because you're a clubbing boy.
Yeah, I think I grew up in nightclubs, and even though I don't, these days I really only go to nightclubs if I'm DJing. I don't go to sort of hang out, but I do love that feeling of. It's very similar to singing. You've got a crowd in your hands. You drop a great record, and in fact, I did a version of Gold, and that goes down honestly, it goes down so massive in clubs. I did a version with.
Why don't I not know this?
Well, it's not out actually. I did it with this artist called Vangelis, who I put forward, to be your singer that time, and not Vangelis from the 70s, a new Vangelis. Oh. And
not that Vangelis.
I'll have to send you it, because when I play it out, people go mad. In fact, you guys should do a dance mix of that track, like a house mix, because the entire club sings it. It's the most exciting thing you've ever. It's
become a weird folk anthem, hasn't it?
It's so strange that when you play it. Well, it's not strange because it's a great song, but when you play it in a house club, literally, I've got videos I'll send you. In Australia, everyone singing along. It was just such a fun thing to experience. And when I DJ, I do try to sort of play, because I'm so associated with the 80s. I do try and get mixes done of sort of 80s tracks and drop them, and they go down so massively in the clubs.
George, I just want to say as well, because I think what you represent to a lot of people is someone who can come through some really bad times and still succeed and feel, rejuvenated as well, and change your life so brilliantly. Because, obviously in some of the 80s wasn't so kind to you as well. I remember, you were on the Band-Aid record amazingly, and then you didn't make the Live Aid show at all. And I did a Rock Against Racism show in Clapham Common in about 86, I think. And I remember you were there, and I remember you weren't in the best of places.
You know what's funny about that particular? I remember that day. Weirdly, I do remember it, and I shouldn't, but there are photographs of that day. And I remember you being there. You were there. Sade was there. I think Sting was there. And there's this really terrible picture. Well, it's not a terrible picture, but it's... I don't look so great in it. And I had no idea. I thought I was doing great, when you're in that hole, you think, oh yeah, it's fine down here, But yeah, I think that, fame is it's a difficult one, isn't it? Because, you know, I don't know about you, but at some point you have to almost make a sort of deal with it. You have to kind of accept that you've put yourself in this spotlight. And, you know, I think one of the greatest things that was ever said to me, a therapist said to me once, you used to take your public responsibility more seriously, and now you don't seem to care. And I knew at the time it wasn't a compliment, but it didn't sink in for a while. And then I suddenly realized what he meant. And I suppose in a way I've spent the last kind of 20 years kind of trying to make that a reality. And, you know, you know, I'm in a very happy place now, and, you know, life's great. And I look back at a lot of that stuff and just think, was that even me? You know, who was that person? You know, I don't know if you ever feel that about your past. You know, it's something quite voyeuristic about looking back at your career and just saying, oh my God, who was I then? How did I even manage to cross the road? How did I even, you know, I mean, when I think about the clarity I have now at this point, you know, and the sort of self-awareness that I have now, I look back at that person and I think, how did you manage to do, well, obviously at the time we had a lot of people helping us, you know, we had these massive, you know, crews around us, but, you know, it was, I think the 80s for me was a time when I didn't really have to think a lot. And I think in the last few years, you know, I think I've worked a lot on myself, you know, my personal self a bit. And
you know, a lot of people died. I know that a lot of your friends died, and our friends died. I mean, Steve Strange died. I mean, all of the same thing. And I mean, there must be something in your mind that says, this is as far as I can go now. I've got to bounce back up. I cannot go to the
I
end.
wish it was that simple. I think that you know, life is you know, it's always a bit of a battle. You know, I always say we're all sort of clinging to a rock in a sense, you know. And I think that when you're in that hole, or when you're in that kind of storm, you're not really, there's no consciousness. And I think it's really a question of, you know, sort of working on yourself. You know, I've had a lot of therapy over the years. I still do therapy. I think it's hugely beneficial because, you know, sometimes I do think to myself, why am I sitting here talking about my past? And then I think what you learn is that you learn what your triggers are and what makes you react in a certain way, what makes you become destructive. And if you can work on that stuff, you can make a big difference to, you know, to your life. And I think as I've got older, I've tried to sort of embrace joy a bit more. You know, I think about those things. I think, well, you know, I've realized that happiness sort of comes in the mundane things. It's not the big explosions that make you truly happy. It's the kind of really mundane stuff that makes the difference, I think.
One thing I'd say, because I've always sort of popped in and out of other people's scenes. You know, I've always been a sideman, so I've never experienced real fame like that. But the one thing I observed from all the people I've worked, and the sort of thing that both of you have experienced, and probably you more, George, as a frontman, is that when you're in the middle of that big fame storm, you're essentially being treated like a child, right? And so there's every reason for all your responses to everything to be incredibly childish.
I was going to reply to you. You're being treated like a child, and you know what? Often you're acting like a child as well. And I think I always talk about those sort of, you know, I think what happens is that you get famous it sort of seems like it just happens overnight, and then you're sort of confronted with all this incredible pressure and excitement as well. It's a sort of duality, and I think that what happens is you start to lose control of your life, and kicking off and saying no to things becomes this weird way of feeling that you have some control over what's going on. And I think, you know, as I've got older, I've just accepted that I chose to be this character, Boy George. You know, I mean, I don't think of my stage persona as being a separate thing from who I am as a person, but I also realize that when I'm dressed up and I've got my hat on, people treat me differently. So, you know, it comes with a sort of responsibility. Fame is a responsibility, and, you know, it's sometimes inflicted on people that aren't prepared to or aren't ready to deal with it. And I think that was true in my case.
I think where the tabloids were concerned with you, and it must have frustrated you to a certain extent, that your fame was not as much about the music, but as about you and your notoriety. And you became, at one moment you're the national treasure and we love you, and the next minute the tabloids are hounding you. I mean, that was quite a fearful moment. I mean, it was the Lady Di thing, wasn't it, that was going on in your life?
It's funny because when you see, the press now, wouldn't get away with any of the things that they got away with back in the 80s, the things that they used to say about you, the homophobia was just blatant. It wasn't even subtle.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember headlines, puffed with muscles, is it a bird, is it a plane? That's, but, a lot of stuff that would make people weep now, be like, oh, you've upset me. And I think that, in a way it toughens you up a little bit, but, luckily for me, I don't really have a sort of anti-press gene. I see it for what it is. I'm not sort of one of these people that won't talk to the media because I see it as such an essential part of what I do. So, I don't take it personally anymore, which I used to really take it personally back, in the 80s and stuff. I used to get very upset. Nowadays, obviously, you've got Twitter and Instagram, and I do like a bit of banter with people, I put a tweet up.
You're great on Twitter, by the way. I love you on Twitter.
I put a tweet up this morning about my new track that's out this week. And I said, oh, how sexy is my new track? And somebody wrote, sexless and chaotic. And, that sort of stuff always makes me laugh because I always think these people have got no idea how I could take a bitch down. I just think, when people treat me, I'm like, if you think that's going to upset me, you and I lived through Julie Birchall. We lived through the 70s, we lived through getting caned at school, all that sort of stuff. So I think that we do have a sort of slightly tougher skin in a way.
Actually, you reminded me of something else, George, which is that because around that time, Andy Rourke from the Smiths got busted for smack, and so he wasn't going to be able to do an American tour. And they were rehearsing down in Sussex, and I was drafted in to play bass. So I was in the Smiths for a week, and.
What was that like?
It was fun. They were a great mad party band, and obviously Morrissey went to bed straight after Dad's Army every night. But it was the same. It was tabloids all camped out in the bushes and everything. But you sent a message of support, I remember, to the band, which was a.
I was a massive Smiths fan. Even though they didn't particularly like me, I liked them. It's funny,
they did after that. It was. I know. Johnny was really big respect to my brother George there, man.
Yeah, I mean, I met Morrissey once in the 80s. I actually had tea with him in Paris, and after I met him, he said I was unbearable.
I think David Hare should write that play, don't you? Morrissey and Boy George having tea in Paris.
It would be a great short film. It wasn't a very long tea session, but I remember afterwards he said I was, what did he call me? He called me overbearing.
Yeah, but imagine how awful it would be if he was nice about you.
I think that to a certain extent, I do love, I'm a massive Morrissey fan. I mean, I don't support his current views, but as a writer, I just love the Smiths. I love Morrissey. I've got all of his records, and I think he's one of those sort of great urban poets. But at the time, they weren't allowed to like us, were they? It was a bit like Culture Club and Spandau. Culture Club, Spandau, Duran Duran. We were all sort of a bit like, territorial about what we were doing,
But that's the golden rule of every movement, isn't it? Is that you have to hate every other band in that movement.
But secretly loving certain tunes, like secretly loving, like certain records, but never admitting it.
I remember when Geldof bumped into me in the King's Road the day after the Michael Burke documentary news report on the famine that was going on in Ethiopia, and he said, "Would you think you and Culture Club, etc., do you think we could make a record together?" And I thought, there's no fucking way any of us are going to be in the same studio together. We hate each other, But I said, well, maybe, stay in touch. And then I remember obviously going to the studio that day with Duran Duran, because we'd just flown in from Germany together, and everybody being there. And then I remember, early in the morning, Bob picking up the phone to you in a hotel room in New York, telling you to get your ass over to Psalm Studios in London. And then we were all carried on working, and then suddenly you walk through the door. It was just an incredible moment.
And I remember actually, because I think at the time I'd had a little bit of a spat with Simon Le Bon. I'd said something that upset him, and I was at a fashion show in Paris a few weeks before, and Simon was there, and he stood up and said, "Apologise." And I was like, absolutely not. I've got nothing to be sorry for. But on that particular day when I arrived at Psalm, the first person I saw was Simon, and he was very sweet, put his arm around me, and it just wasn't a time for sort of petty squabbles. And I think one of the great things about that scene at Psalm Studios was nobody was getting special treatment because everybody was like famous, and nobody was getting a private room or cups of tea. It was all just like everyone mucking in, and it was quite surreal. I remember at one point sort of waiting to go into the men's loo, and there was like Marilyn, Status Quo, Midjaw, this one, that one. It was just the maddest.
Well, Status Quo were always around the men's loo, I seem to remember. But listen, did it really happen like this, that you weren't going to come, and then Bob's on the phone to you from London, and then you put the phone down, you phone your PA or tour manager and say, get me on Concorde?
Well, what it was, I was supposed to be coming back a couple of days later, and I just, I suppose, just thought, well, what's all the fuss about? I'll be there in a couple of days. I'll just do it then. And Bob had rung me and, woke me up at 3:00 in the morning. And, I was in a hotel in New York, and normally they don't put people through at 3 a.m, but obviously he was quite persuasive. And I didn't know Bob. I knew who he was, but I didn't know him personally. So I had this mad Irishman screaming at me down the phone saying, you need to come back. I was like, okay, come back.
People filming him at the other
end.
And
I didn't even know what I don't think anyone really knew what they were walking into. And I flew back the next day. I was absolutely knackered. I had no sleep. But, you could do that at that point. You didn't really care.
Oh, yeah.
And I remember walking into Psalm and sort of being played the song once and then sort of being marched into the studio to sing with cameras in my face and all of that. So it was quite a pressurized moment, but you just...
Yeah, but can I say, I remember being there when you went in and you sang, and everybody in the control room, just their jaws hit the ground. I mean, you got off this plane, you had no sleep, you'd had a tiff, and then you walk in and you sing like an angel straight away. I mean, it was great to watch. I've always
thought that, imagine what I'd have been like if I'd had some sleep.
That guy who had leant over the balcony and said, I could sing better than your singer in a squat. And oh, well, making history.
That was a great time. And, sort of at that moment, didn't really understand what it was and what it meant. But I'm so glad that I was part of that,
So how's it? So now you've written this album. Who's Tony Visconti? It's a shame Trident's not opened, isn't it? Still, because that would be the place to record it. Although he used to have that other studio, didn't he, in Soho? What was that called?
Dean Street. He was in Dean Street, I think, wasn't he, or one of those places?
There were two Tridents, wasn't there? There was a Trident in Soho, and then there was the one in Victoria.
Well, no, there's a Trident in Soho, but is that where because didn't Tony Visconti's studio is where Midge recorded Fade to Grey because I popped down to one of those early Visage sessions, and it was it's gone. But
the thing with obviously this current thing that I'm doing, obviously I've had to do it virtually, and it's been all through emails and phone conversations. But my ultimate dream would be to, obviously there's nothing like being in a studio physically with other people and bouncing off, musicians and telling people they're rubbish and start again and all that stuff, and all those little dramas that you have when you're making a record. I miss that, and I certainly...
You're the first person I've heard say the great thing about making records is telling people they're rubbish.
Bands or, Gary will understand this, there's always, and especially you're the main songwriter in the band, so, you're going to have a really strong idea about what you want things to sound like. And, and you sort of have this sort of passionate connection to what you're doing musically, and, it's difficult to compromise. So those little sort of moments in the studio where, I think these days I have so much fun in the studios. Back in the day, it was a little bit more, chaotic. But I think these days I just, it's where I feel the most comfortable and just relaxed. And, I just love it.
Was it very collaborative with Culture Club? Or was it like more, who did everyone bring stuff to the table?
I think that,
very much?
Roy and I were the sort of main
I was going to say, I would have thought
collaborators.
Roy was,
And then, but, you can never... The thing about songs, and you think back and you think, oh yeah, I remember that. Like that was maybe someone playing a drum beat, or Do You Really Want to Hurt Me? 100% came from Mikey's bass line. He was playing this, dub, and I was like, oh, I've got an idea for this. A lot of it is just in the moment, isn't it? You bounce off people, but because I don't play an instrument, I can't sit there and have that conversation with an instrument that, say, you could or Roy can. And it was all sorts of things. I mean, I think it was collaborative. There were times when everybody was in sync, and there were times when one person wouldn't get it, and the other three would be like, "Oh, this is brilliant," and one, I'd be saying, "Oh, I hate it," it's rubbish. That's just part of the process, I think, isn't it?
George, doing some of those 80s TV shows we used to have to do all over Europe, and like going to, Germany in particular. And is there a story? Is it in your book? I can't remember, but I remember always turning up at German TV shows, and it would be a terrible backdrop with dancers would come on stage. And isn't there a story around you doing "Do You Really Want to Hurt Me"?
There was a really funny. Well, there were a few incidents, obviously, because when you first start out in this business, particularly our generation, we were so involved in everything that we did creatively, and we were very involved in the way that we looked and the way that we were presented. And you go to somewhere like, I remember once in Belgium, there was a TV show, and we were doing "Do You Really Want to Hurt Me," and there were all these like brains in like glass jars and hearts and surgery and all these people on beds and nurses. And I walk in and I'm like, no, absolutely not. And one thing I didn't like at all, which was funny, I love dancers, I love people that can dance, but I never really liked having dance. I just thought it was wrong, to have people dancing when you're playing. And sometimes you get to the studio and they've worked out these lovely dance routines. And I'd be like, no, I don't want them on stage. They don't dress right. We were so difficult, weren't we?
Yeah, but I remember the first TV we did in Belgium, to cut a long story short. And we flew over there. We did this TV we mimed to it in a studio, and then we went back. And the record company then we said, "Can we want to see the film of that?" You do when you first start doing television shows.
Yeah.
And they got a VHS of it. We went into the office to watch it, and they must have had this other bloke with a clown's makeup on in another room being filmed against the black background. And what they did was they tried throughout the entire song to superimpose this bloke's clown's face on Tony Hadley's.
Oh, I would have gone mental. I would have gone mental.
Too late, it got out.
There were so many times when, sometimes you had to just. I remember Jeremy Healy telling me this hilarious story. He went to Germany with Hazy Fantasia, and they were doing John Wayne's Big Leggy, and the TV station decided to have all these rabbits in a sort of little Hansel and Gretel cottage, and the rabbits all started having sex with each other.
Well, I remember doing German TV shows with Ice House. We had a hit over there called Street Cafe. And you think, well, you've made it pretty easy for them, haven't you? It's called Street Cafe. And the first one we turned up at, they'd made a Turkish bath with a swimming pool in the middle full of dancers covered in cling film and Christmas trees.
Well, I think, in those moments, you're at the mercy of these kind of, these creatives that, think they understand what you're about, and they, sort of do something that's completely inappropriate. And you're like, no! And they spent weeks on it. They've spent weeks on it.
That's true. But talking of 80s TV shows and things that are inappropriate, George, I couldn't believe it when you actually said awesome on the A-Team.
I know, I was forced. Well, I was paid a lot of money. To do that show. And
but the whole point of having you on is because you're this great eccentric English star.
I know.
So why make you say something that only American teenagers?
Oh, when I saw the script for that show, I was just like, I can't say this, and it's not something I would say. And I was suitably difficult, as I would say.
You're talking about doing other things, George, just before we finally let you go into the grandeur of that space you're in. Do you write a musical about us lot, if you like, about the whole scene and about you and the struggles you went through. Taboo, which you got a Tony nomination for in America, didn't you?
I did, and we've been talking a bit recently with different people about maybe relooking at Taboo, because I think at the time it was just a bit too much for people. I remember when we went to New York and we were on Broadway. I remember sort of me, I played Lee Bowery, and my first scene was emerging from a public toilet in a tutu. And people just weren't ready for that, They weren't ready for it.
I remember because you had Philip Salon was a character in it. Philip Salon's one of our great sort of. How would you describe Philip?
Philip is, a great British concentric.
And I remember, Philip's always been at the head of everything. I mean, the first time I saw the Sex Pistols, Philip was dancing on the stage at the Screen on the Green, and there he was dancing at the Blitz, and then he's got.
Oh yeah, for me, Philip was a massive influence on me when I met him, and I never met anyone like it. I remember the first time I ever met Philip, I had a girlfriend. Can you believe that? And we were in a taxi with him in a black cab, and Philip was just constantly changing his outfit because he got bored. Every 5 minutes, he would put something new on, and he would drag us to all these different clubs. And every club we went to, he would get all these clothes out of a plastic bag and just read. He was like, I can't be seen in the same outfit at 2 clubs.
I know, because he's a character in Taboo as well. And I went to the premiere in London of Taboo, and because whenever his character came on stage, he was telling everyone to shush, shush, so they were. And then I remember your character comes on stage, and he tried his hardest to distract everyone. At one point, he stood up and he went, "I've lost me ring, I've lost me ring," and someone shouted out, "You lost that years ago, love."
Listen, Philip, there's been a few productions of Taboo, and Philip's always been there, and he is always entertaining. He's always causing trouble, doing inappropriate things. He even once tried to readjust someone's outfit as they were about to go on stage once when we were doing one performance. And he was always there in the front row, making sure everybody knew he was there. But I guess that's what we love about Philip, is that he is such a, sort of natural born show off, isn't he, really?
And then you took over from Tom Jones and did the voice. I mean, that was National Treasure time again, wasn't it?
Yeah, I did. I really enjoyed that. I did it in Australia after for about 4 years, and my last season was last year. I really enjoyed doing it. It's a funny old thing, isn't it? Because to be honest with you, my favourite thing is, playing concerts and singing. But these days, you have to kind of diversify. You can't just rely on music. And so, it's been quite interesting sort of branching out into TV land. But, I think you have to be careful not to do too much of that. But I really enjoy doing The Voice because it's a music-based show. So it sits quite well with me,
You weren't commuting, were you? Were you staying there?
No, I stayed in Australia. And in fact, I came back just as the pandemic started. I managed to get back into the UK. And obviously, what's happened for the last year. We've all been in isolation, but I really enjoyed doing The Voice. I mean, it's a great gig, it's a great thing to do. I enjoyed doing it, and I ended up working with, some people that I met on the show. I've made some music with some of those people, and I've developed some great friendships, particularly with Vangelis, who was on my team in the UK. He's one of my best friends now. So some great things came out of doing The Voice, and I know there was a lot of hoo-ha about me saying I stole Tom Jones's job, but I'm a massive Tom Jones fan. I grew up loving him, and I remember used to play his records when I was a kid. So it was all crap really, because I was a massive fan of Tom.
You must be looking forward to playing live again. I mean, we all are. It's been such a horrible year for musicians.
Absolutely, and we have got this gig in about a week or so at Wembley. We're not sure right now whether we can have physical people or whether it's just going to be a stream. But
who's on the bill?
Just Ask Culture Club, and we're doing an hour set just for at the beginning of this week we were doing it to a live audience, but that might change. So every day, as you know, it's a different story.
What would you do it to a video wall, to a sort of wall of thousands of people on Zoom?
Well, that would work. We did that with The Voice, but I think that it's an interesting challenge to play, a gig with no audience. It puts, you have to work a bit harder, but I'm cool with that. I think we have to start doing something or we'll just go mad.
Yeah. And do you have to pay can you pay to stream it, or how does it work?
No, you can, if you're, I mean, the streaming thing is quite a new thing, isn't it? Although people don't realize that they're streaming 24/7 anyway. If they're on their phones or on YouTube or they're watching the telly, it's the same principle. Yeah, it's not rocket science, guys.
Well, it's the idea of the interaction, though, isn't it? Although there's a place down here in Brighton which has started doing gigs where people they play to a video wall so people can interapt with it. And
but the good thing is, if you're in your living room, you can dance like an idiot and no one's going to say anything. So it's a perfect, sort of situation. You can put your pajamas on, and pour yourself a nice drink and just enjoy it. And I think we're all trying to, find ways of doing what we do, safely. And I've really missed playing. I mean, I'm sure you do as well. It's like the beginning of the pandemic, I didn't really think about it, and then suddenly, as the sort of months went by, I went, I'm not working, and I'm a workaholic. I love working.
Yeah, well, we all do, yeah.
Georgian, thank you for coming on and doing this with us as well. God, it's been a real pleasure talking to you.
Absolutely, yeah. I've really enjoyed doing it, and it's nice to talk to you. And I must send you that version of Gold, because it's a smash.
I'd love to hear that. Lots of love to you, sir. Good luck.
All right,
cheers,
take care,
George.
guys.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye.
He was great, wasn't he?
He was fantastic. He was really, really good. It was really, and it's nice, that kinship of the time. It's funny because obviously you two are closer part of a thing than I was. I was skirting around it, but that's really nice to hear that, and it's fantastic the journey he's been on and where he is now, isn't it?
Oh yeah, I mean, I think he's so full of health.
Yeah,
when you listen to him, I know. I mean, but he's got that desire to live, and that's what I was trying to sort of talk about really earlier on when I was saying, what was it that you could go so low and yet you always bounce back, and he's got such a desire, to create. I don't think I'm scared of him anymore, after that.
I don't know. Easy.
Anyway, so thank you for listening today. You can go to all the channels that have us on, and you can subscribe and leave a review.
Then it's good night from me.
And it's good night from him.